Hello everyone. Once again, welcome to the IR Current Affairs Show. Today we have an important topic, that is Indo-US trade deal that was signed recently. We would not talk about this deal only in terms of its content. We have to talk in terms of what kind of questions we get in IR as far as mains is concerned, right? So we would discuss this deal in terms of strategic, economic, and geopolitical dimensions. That would give us a lot of idea about different things that you are supposed to study as part of this topic. We need to understand that the kind of questions UPSC has been asking in recent years particularly, most of the questions are in global context. And that's why global geopolitical, strategic, geoeconomic context and India's place in that. And in that context, India is a little bit different than other countries. So this is the kind of pattern that we are witnessing in recent years. So let's talk about this deal from that perspective. First of all, let us go through 6 themes that I have picked up from different articles, right? So first theme number 1 is background and context. Theme number 2 is what Rudra Chaudhary had to say. No reset to past, but reframing of future. So it's not that we are going back to the past before turbulence started with those tariffs slapped by Trump, right? It's not reset to the past, but reframing of future. What he had to say, we would discuss that in that article, right? Then the next theme is an article written by Harsh Pant and Vivek Mishra, closing the loop on turbulence. So obviously there was a lot of turbulence caused by Trump's policies, right? 50% tariff, he was talking about 25% was slapped, right? So in that context, these two scholars say that it's like closing the loop on the turbulence, and then they have discussed lots of things regarding the consequences and what kind of changes we observe at national, regional and systemic level, right? Then theme number 4, Vivek Mishra's article again, strategic concessions and economic growth. He has focused on what concessions we are getting sector-wise and what is the potential for economic growth, right? Then number 5, there was an article by C. Raja Mohan in Indian Express, right? He says that it's a decisive break from the past. C. Raja Mohan has been talking about this ever since NDA government led by Prime Minister Modi came to the power. He has talked about 2014 being an important break point, important turning point for the foreign policy of India. But Sumit Ganguly has somehow countered that. And on the conclusion front, we can say that there have been important departures, important changes in the foreign policy, but it's not a total break, right? Here we would examine what he has to say and how we can conclude in terms of whether it indicates any kind of radical change, departure, or it's an important change but not a radical departure. We'll discuss that. And in the end, we would conclude the entire discussion. So this is a good enough content, rather sizable content. I would need some time today, right, to explain this. Let's begin with background and context. So the first point that we have is in what backdrop and in what context this deal was signed, right? So India-US trade deal marks a significant moment in bilateral relations amid, make it 26, right? Trump's renewed tariff-centric statecraft. Anybody can use this term, but PSI students must use this kind of language. So tariff-centric statecraft. He has been talking about reciprocal tariffs. Most of his policies, foreign policies, are somehow shaped by his concern that US has been too lenient, too liberal and considerate to other countries, and there has to be some parity as far as tariffs are concerned. So this is one context, one backdrop, Trump's renewed tariff-centric statecraft. Second, India's growing economic weight, right, and strategic autonomy. We would discuss this. Everybody knows this. So arguably now we are 4th largest economy in the world, right, and one of the fastest growing. So that's one thing that sets the backdrop and context to the deal. Second, after Trump slapped tariffs on India and threatened for another 25% of tariffs, after that, how India handled things, right? We would discuss that as well. Number of scholars have talked about that, and that dealing clearly indicate that India exercised strategic autonomy. That is another important context. Then This is what has happened. Reduction of effective tariff levels to 25%, right? Tariff levels to 18% from 25% and potentially from 50%. So this was a threat issued by Donald Trump, and this is what he had already done, right? So this provides immediate economic relief to India and different economic sectors of India, right? Announcement coincides with high-level diplomatic engagement and growing private sector integration. We need to understand this. A number of scholars have highlighted this. So it goes beyond officialdom. It goes beyond officialdom. Only officials negotiating things. No, there has been an important concrete role played by the private sector as well. We will talk about this factor as well in detail. So that's background and context. Let's now quickly go to the analysis by Rudra Chaudhary. This is how he describes it. No reset to past, but reframing of future. How does this deal reframe future for Indo-US relations and also for geopolitics of the world? Core argument of Rudra Chaudhary is this: current phase is not a strategic reset, but reframing of future India-US relationship, right? Right now, this relationship is shaped by forces beyond officialdom. I concluded the context point with this, and now we pick up that thread. So what has happened now is this is shaped not only by officials, not only by diplomats, not only by the economic advisors of both countries, but by private sector, right? So technology firms, investors, supply chains, strategic communities, all these factors did play a role in signing this deal or coming to this deal. What are the key points as far as Rudra Chaudhary's article is concerned? A, tariffs as statecraft. So I have mentioned that in the introduction, right? Tariffs as statecraft. So US has normalized tariffs as foreign policy tool. This is how you should write, right? US has now normalized that tariff is a foreign policy tool to be used as a pressure tactic, right? Reduction to 18% offers what for India? Breathing space for Indian exporters. That was a setback. There's no doubt about that, right? Opposition had already discussed a lot about this in India, right? So breathing space for Indian exporters. Temporary market stability. Temporary because it depends on number of factors, and sometimes many factors are unseen. So going in the future, we cannot say that this would remain same. And we know the volatility and uncertainty that accompanies Donald Trump's policy making, right? That's why temporary market stability is one outcome that we see. Agricultural market access issues remain unresolved. So Rudra Chaudhary has rightly pointed out, details are yet to come. We are yet to get the entire draft of the deal, right? But prima facie, based on media briefing and whatever has come out, right? Agricultural market access. What is the exact nitty-gritty of this aspect is not yet clear, right? That's why if there would be some kind of issues, these issues are not yet resolved because the deal is not yet clear regarding how much access will be given as far as agriculture market is concerned. This would be a major area of concern as far as India is concerned, right? B, the second point that Rudra Chaudhary has highlighted is this: strategic resilience beyond politics. Strategic resilience beyond politics. Okay, what he has to say here? Despite political turbulence, there was political turbulence, right? We have seen that Trump and the way he was dealing with different countries, including India. US tech investments in India surged. Now, this is a very important aspect because let me go back and tell you how this is to be connected. So this has to be connected with this point. So whether governments are taking forward their cooperation or not, but the robust private sector collaboration has driven a number of things in the absence of deal as well, right? When there was no deal, even then, right, over 50 billion were announced, right? Deals of 50 billion announced ahead of AI Impact Summit. Again, you should note this because this is current affairs, and we will definitely talk about this aspect as well once that summit takes place in New Delhi. This is the schedule for it, 16th to 20th Feb. So ahead of AI Impact Summit, US tech investments, those which are announced, even the deal is yet to be finalized, rather yet to come out. So $50 billion dollar investment has been announced by US tech firms. That is very clear message, right? So private sector is little bit on different page as compared to the government of USA, right? CEOs and venture capitalists continued engagement even as official rhetoric worsened. What was the official rhetoric? That parity in tariffs, right? Reciprocal tariffs. Despite that, in spite of that, CEOs and venture capitalists, right, were quite proactive when it comes to investing in India. And this was the situation before deal, right? So this demonstrates structural resilience in bilateral ties. So even if the governments are confronting each other, their respective private sector has got deeper engagement. Even if governments have some kind of friction, right, private sector engagement is quite robust. That is called strategic resilience by Rudra Chaudhary, right? His third point, very important point that he has highlighted, that is Pax Silica framework. What is Pax Silica framework? We will talk about that. So Pax Silica framework is an initiative led by Jacob Helber, US State Department के official है. What does that contain, this initiative? It contains a focus on securing supply chains for two important things: advanced technologies and critical minerals. And this has been driving Donald Trump's foreign policy everywhere, whether it's Venezuela or whether it's Greenland that he claimed, whether his relation with other European countries, right? Advanced technologies like AI and critical minerals. So for that, securing supply chains is the focus of what is called Pax Silica framework, right? Non-treaty bespoke agreements with trusted partners. So what is the focus? See, we know the focus. What is the instrument? This is the instrument. Trusted. We want trusted partners, whether there's agreement or not. You should look forward to closer cooperation with US as far as these two aspects are concerned. So non-treaty bespoke agreements through the speech, through the talks. So Donald Trump is looking forward to some kind of a relationship where these things are taken for granted, right? That is Pax Silica framework. So India is expected to formally join with carefully negotiated statement, and this is under work. This is under work. So India is positioning itself as far as Pax Silica is concerned, and then going into the talks, we would negotiate based on what position we decide, right? Number 4, strategic diversification. Again, Rudra Chaudhary has rightly pointed out, India no longer takes US for granted. Now, there has been a shock. we talked a lot about India-US bonhomie ever since Donald Trump came to the power, in the second term, even in the first term, right? But the way he handled India, particularly in terms of trade and tariffs, right, that has shook the belief of India that US can be all-weather friend, right? And that is why we cannot take US for granted. And if we cannot take US for granted, if we know that there will be turbulences, we need to hedge that turbulence, right? And for that, India preferred diversification, right? Ironically, US provided space for greater emphasis on an outcome-based approach to Europe. Please understand this. So, long-standing FTA, right? Long-standing FTA between India and EU, which was pending since 2007, was signed recently. And it was US that created the space. US pressurized EU bilaterally, US pressurized India bilaterally, these two came together. So ironically speaking, US provided that space for India and EU, and the outcome is this. FTA with EU, I would prepare a separate lecture on this as well, the FTA with EU, right? So enhanced ties with Germany, France, UK. So this is diversification that India has been doing as a response to Trump's sort of tariff statecraft, something that we mentioned earlier, right? So diversification is not hedging as such, but reimagination of strategic priorities. Prima facie, as I said in the beginning, it looks like hedging, but Rudra Chaudhary says that it is not merely hedging. It is not hedging, rather. It is reimagination of strategic priorities. And that's how he began. It's not a mere reset to the past, but it provides a framework to the future relationship, right? So that's Rudra Chaudhary. So what is the analytical takeaway as far as his article is concerned? So he says that India is embracing resilience into its foreign policy, decoupling strategic cooperation from political volatility. So strategic cooperation should become immune to political volatility, at least to the extent possible. And that can bring a lot of resilience. So that what it means, I just said a short while ago, this is USA, this is government of USA, this is India, this is government of India. What is happening between these two, politically speaking, political volatility? In spite of that, there should be robust kind of economic relationship. So that is resilience that we are talking about in the foreign policy, right? So that's the analysis by Rudra Chaudhary. Now let's look at what Harsh Pant and Vivek Mishra had to say. I have mentioned this while discussing themes. They say that we have now on the verge of closing the loop on turbulence caused by tariff statecraft that Donald Trump has started, right? Core argument again, India-US relations have entered a phase of greater parity. That is their argument, greater parity, moving away from entrenched asymmetry. The US being a big economy, big tech power, technology power. So there was asymmetry between India and US, right? And that asymmetry gave US a lot of bargaining power. And that's why it tried to bully us, Donald Trump particularly, right? But what has been seen now, in spite of that bullying, India stood in front of it. We found other ways out. We exercised a lot of strategic patience, right? And all these things have given a sort of greater parity to India vis-a-vis US. That is the core argument of Harsh Pant and Vivek Mishra. So anticipation around striking a deal was more acute in Washington. You can see this thing in two ways. If you see this from the perspective of Rudra Chaudhary, he would say that this is what I was pointing to, strategic kind of relationship despite political instability. That's how he looks at it. How Harsh Pant, Vivek Mishra look at it? Anticipation ज़्यादा था US में, Washington में ज़्यादा anticipation था. There's more anticipation that this deal should go through, right? That is what they wanted. The anxiety that the deal should go was more in Washington than New Delhi. So that tells us that they were more eager. That means now they would treat India in a different way. That brings greater parity between the two. Again, the key themes as far as arguments of these two are concerned, Harsh Pant and Vivek Mishra. First, I mentioned that short while ago, India's strategic restraint. Standing in front of that bullying by Donald Trump, how India responded? India responded with tremendous kind of strategic patience or restraint, right? How do we look at it? Many scholars looked at it critically. This is something we should not do. We should be more assertive. But in hindsight, Harsh Pant agrees, in hindsight, we now think that has paid dividends, right? So India avoided retaliation during tariff escalation and seemed frustratingly reticent. So during tariff escalation, we did not retaliate. We did not do tit for tat. That looked like we are on defensive. In fact, frustratingly reticent. Reticent means what? You are not outspoken about it. You are not speaking enough. Your point of view, your response. So you look like a mute spectator to one-sided bullying. That's how it was criticized, right? Maintained growth and diplomatic composure. India maintained its own growth and growth in bilateral trade as well through private trade partnership, private sector partnership, and diplomatic composure. We maintained as much diplomatic composure, patience as possible, right? So now these scholars say that in hindsight, the restraint, right, yielded leverage and credibility. And that leverage brought the greater parity and credibility in terms of dealing with US almost on rather with greater parity as far as trade deal is concerned, right? Next point, economic significance of the trade deal, right? Now Harsh Pant and Vivek Mishra talk about economic significance. Ambitious promise of US $500 billion, right, in bilateral trade is obviously a significant turning point. The kind of target that has been set is quite ambitious and that looks quite positive. However, there is a caveat. What is the caveat? Absence of clear timeline. When is this to be achieved? That has not been clarified. Maybe details are yet to come. Trade deal details are not in the public domain as of now. So that is why we don't have any kind of timeline as far as this ambitious target is concerned. Revised tariff of 18% could spur significant economic activity between these two countries, and that can be beneficial to multiple sectors in India. We are anyway going to talk about that later, right? Can re-energize sectors such as textiles, auto components, gems and jewelry sector, and other key areas of bilateral trade. So, spurring of economic activity may benefit these sectors. It can re-energize these sectors. That is economic significance of the deal. What is the political significance? Something that we always do, that framework of Kenneth Waltz we use, right? So at national level, how it is operating, what is the significance? At bilateral level, right? And at systemic level. Look at this. So at national level, in US, trade standoff had created space for cultivation of anti-India sentiment in US. That in turn fed into broader conservative and nativist currents, right? Conservative kind of influence on the policy circles, on decision-making circles, leads to mercantilist policy. It leads to mercantilist policies, which prevents any kind of developments going towards trade deal, right? That was one problem. Second, nativist currents become xenophobic. And this has to be taken into consideration, considering that there's a large diaspora in US, Indian diaspora, a number of aspiring people preferring to go to US in terms of making their own fortunes, right? And companies as well, right? So these two were disturbing factors. Now that the trade standoff is dealt with by trade deal, these things can now subside, right? That is one significance at the national level in US. Second, at the national level in India, prompted to reassess trust, pursue a strategy of soft balancing through internal economic labor reforms, as well as diversified external partnerships. In fact, there were three things. One, a sort of diplomatic composure, patience, number one, our response. Number two, soft balancing through these things, economic and labor reforms. And number three, economic diversification. So all these things paid off as far as India is concerned, and that's how US became positive for the deal. At the bilateral level, this deal goes beyond economics because the deal closes the loop on a rather sordid phase in India-US relations. Ever since George Bush Jr. became president of US, who is by far considered as the most favorable president to India, favorable US president to India, pro-India president to India, right? India-US relations have been always very good. A lot of trust, bonhomie was seen. There were some episodes like Devyani Khobragade was arrested in US, an Indian diplomat, right? But that was not a very major kind of problem because the issue involved was solved, right? But tariff policy was something that was a major disturbance. And now this has been dealt with by trade deal, it seems, at least as of now, right? So a sordid phase comes to an end. Symbolically ends turbulent phase. The turbulence caused by Donald Trump and what is coming, we did not know because of his uncertainty. That also seems to have ended at the bilateral level. At the systemic level, it could re-legitimize, galvanize cooperation frameworks like the Quad. At the regional systemic level, that is Indo-Pacific, Quad is an important platform, right? We need to understand, it's not just about Quad. You can talk about I2U2 in Middle East, right? IMEC corridor in Middle East. So number of initiatives where India could have faced problems because of the kind of attitude that Donald Trump administration was showing, right? So this may re-legitimize, galvanize cooperation frameworks like Quad. That's political significance. Relief to India in context of divergent in US policies in India's neighborhood. This was one discomfort India was facing recently, right? The upstick in US-Pak ties, and we know that very well, right? US hosted lunch or dinner with Pakistani military general, right? So the kind of comfort and bonhomie that was seen in India, US and Pakistan rather, right, was discomforting factor for us, right? So now US again approaching India indicates sort of continuation of de-hyphenation between India and Pakistan, right? So that's at systemic level, regional systemic level, right? Reinforces US commitment to Indo-Pacific, albeit with burden-sharing expectations. Do not ignore this. So US is still committed to what? Open, free Indo-Pacific. However, US expects that other countries have to share more burden, right? So that's how they now look at Indo-Pacific. There is not a major policy change, but this may bring more burden to the partners like Japan, Australia, India. What is the challenge? Politically speaking, managing complex great power relations, particularly with Russia and China. I would talk about this briefly, right? We going closer to US, right? Signing a trade deal with US, right? Donald Trump has openly said that India has decided to stop importing oil from Russia. So what consequences it will have, if at all it happens, on Indo-Russia relations? Because these two have been pretty close ever since turbulence brought by Donald Trump, right? And if India and US come together, right, that generates sort of apprehension in the mind of China about containment of China policy. Containment policy, right? So China may become aggressive as far as its relation with India is concerned, right? So these fallouts need to be managed diplomatically, handled, right? So what is the analytical takeaway as far as Harsh Pant and Vivek Mishra are concerned? Their article is concerned. The trade deal converts crisis management into strategic consolidation. So we started dealing with this crisis management in terms of three things: strategic patience, soft balancing, and diversification. Strategic patience, soft balancing, and diversification, right? And now that gets translated to strategic consolidation with US, right? Okay. That is the takeaway as far as the article of Harsh Pant. And let us now move to another article by Vivek Mishra. His theme is strategic concessions and economic growth. What concessions are given and sector-wise what will be the benefits for India. Core argument of Vivek Mishra: the bilateral trade agreement tests India's tariff strategy against Trump's protectionism while targeting US $500 billion trade by 2030. That is what Vivek Mishra thinks. It is targeted for 2030, right? Yet to be clarified. Now, Trump's protectionism would be there despite the deal, right, that we are talking about, interim deal, details of which are to be worked out. Despite the deal, Trump protectionism would continue. What is many times called Trumpism would continue, right? In that context, how to strategize our tariffs? That would be a testing period as far as India is concerned, right? Now, different takeaways from Vivek Mishra's article. Economic dimensions. He talks about trade structure. India had US $45.7 billion surplus in bilateral trade as far as statistics of 2024 is concerned, right? Trump's aversion to surplus countries makes India an exception that is politically significant. Trump does not like other countries enjoying current account surplus because that means, US is facing current account deficit. Trump feels that because of uneven, non-reciprocal kind of tariffs, these countries are enjoying surplus. And he literally targets such kind of countries. So now he coming for the deal with India, right, with more anxiety at domestic level in US, right, looks politically significant. India becomes an exception to Trump's approach towards tariff surplus countries, current account surplus countries, right? Second point, India's signaling strategy, reduction of peak tariffs. We see it's always quid pro quo, right? When we get something or we give something. So what are we giving? We are reducing tariffs on certain commodities asked by US, imported from US, from 150 to 70%. Tariff cuts on bourbon whiskey, wines, and electronic vehicles, right? So this is what India is doing. According to Mishra, these are symbolic concessions to establish negotiation goodwill negotiation goodwill बनाने के लिए किया गया है, symbolic है. Why does he say so, Vivek Mishra? Because it is symbolic in the sense this does not have a major bearing on trade surplus that India enjoys. उसका बहुत बड़ा impact नहीं होगा. So it's symbolic for us, right? For them it's important, right? So that is strategic symbolic concession given to US by India. Number 3, what would be sector-wise implications? We'll go through it quickly because it's kind of factual detail, right? So gems jewelry, there is major opportunity. US imports some $9.9 billion US dollar value of import as far as gem jewelry is concerned. So India is a major exporter as far as gems and jewelry is concerned. Textiles, India exports worth $10.8 billion, and this could be a likely US pressure point because these are two sectors, particularly textiles, where India earns the surplus, something that Trump doesn't like, right? So this could be a pressure point going forward as well, right? Then aluminium and steel. India's aluminium exports to US, $947 million, right? There is a threat from renewed US metal tariffs. US has already talked about full 25% tariff on any country for that matter, right? As far as aluminum and steel is concerned. And that would not be an exception as far as Indo-US trade is concerned. That could be one challenge going ahead, right? Then talk about energy sector. India is increasing oil gas imports from US as a result of this deal, right? Okay. Energy geoeconomics as stabilizing pillar between the two. Trump has been consistently critical about those countries who import energy sources from his adversaries. And India was one of them. India still is one of them as long as we buy oil from natural gas from Russia. Now, India increasing US share in the import basket, energy import basket of India is something that would soothe the nerves of Donald Trump, right? Okay, so that's stabilizing pillar. Electronics and smart devices. Risk from reciprocal tariffs could mean larger capital outflow, upsetting a whole range of value chains in India. See, if Trump continues for this reciprocal tariffs in this sector particularly, right? That's a gray area because details are not yet out. So if this happens, that could lead to larger capital outflow from India. The kind of capital that is invested by different players like Apple for that matter, right, may go out, and that may directly impact India's growth, right? And it may also upset the whole chain of supply chain, whole supply chain, right? Implications for Apple-led supply chains from India is an example in this regard. ये उसका example, right? Defense. So likely push for big ticket US defense sales, F-35, P-18 kind of deals, right? So this deal may give a big ticket defense deals, right, between these two countries. So defense deals बड़े हो सकते हैं in terms of money, right? Easiest route to bridge trade deficit. US के point of view. How can US bridge that trade surplus? If somehow US pushes India to go for big ticket deals in defense, in which they have advantage, in textiles we have advantage, right? So textile में तो नहीं कर पाएंगे, तो defense deal के through they can bridge the difference between surplus, right? Trade deficit rather. Strategic challenge, according to Vivek Mishra, balancing tariff concessions with protection of agriculture and domestic industry. Bang on. Very important point raised by Vivek Mishra. What is that? Tariff concessions are there. We are looking forward to it. But while you get tariff concessions, you have to give tariff concessions. And if those tariff concessions, which are yet to come out clearly, right, impact agriculture and domestic industry, that would be a costly affair for India. Already there is some kind of apprehension, concern in India regarding these two sectors, right? Okay. So that's about Vivek Mishra. Now the last article, C. Raja Mohan. How C. Raja Mohan looked at this deal, right? So he looked at this deal a little bit in a different way, comparing current government with the previous government, right? So decisive break from the past. He is talking in terms of how India deals with US, how India dealt with US in the past, how India is now dealing with US under current government. Core argument of Raja Mohan, the interim trade deal. This is an interim trade deal. represents a decisive shift in India's negotiating culture. So he is saying that there's a different kind of negotiation. We had different kind of negotiating culture under UPA governments, and this is quite different, which is more confident, more positive. Let's talk about that. So key insights as far as Raja Mohan's article is concerned from Indian Express. Now the change is from defensive to confident negotiator. Defensive negotiator tha India under UPA governments. Now India looks like much more confident kind of negotiator. India shedding post-colonial anxieties about sovereignty and autonomy. Right from Nehru, we always had that fear that if we have closer kind of relation with great powers, they may start dictating our foreign policy and other internal policies. So that would erode our sovereignty. That would erode our autonomy. See, Raja Mohan never misses an opportunity to attack the scholars who talk about strategic autonomy. And here as well he has done that, right? So post-colonial anxieties is what he calls, right, as far as that strategic autonomy is concerned. Engagement with US no longer seen as inherently threatening. There was a thought process, right, from Nehru up to, I would say, Narsingh Rao, Vajpayee, right, that the engagement with US is always threatening somehow, right? I would not get into that thing because it would consume a lot of time, and that's an old phenomenon, Cold War kind of phenomenon, where US used to dominate in different ways. So that would lead to neocolonialism. That's how people at that time concluded. And that is post-colonial anxiety, to use the term of C. Raja Mohan, right? So confident negotiators shedding these things, right? Contrast with civil nuclear deal era. In 2008, India signed civil nuclear deal with USA under Dr. Manmohan Singh as Prime Minister, right? C. Raja Mohan observes that there was some kind of hesitation, right, in signing the deal. Plus, there was political paralysis, right? What was he pointing to as far as this civil nuclear deal is concerned? Number one, the deal came in trouble because left parties threatened to withdraw the outside support to UPA. And when Dr. Manmohan Singh signed, they withdrew. Government came in minority. But it was timely support given by Samajwadi Party of Mulayam Singh that saved the government and the deal as well, right? So that is one thing. Second, hesitation, right? We need to understand that hesitation as well. Because we signed the deal, but thereafter what happened? Thereafter we talked about the clause that deals with compensation if any kind of accident happens, right? So compensation clause. So that deadlock was not resolved till Obama's visit in 2015 under current Prime Minister. And that's why even though deal was signed, there was sort of paralysis of implementation, right? Since 2008 to 2015, right? So that is what he's pointing to. False narrative of vassal state exposed over time. If you go closer to US, you become a vassal state of US. मतलब राजा है, उसका जमींदार बनोगे आप, उसका कोई एक वैसल चीफ बनोगे, जो आपकी कंट्रोल, उसकी कंट्रोल में रहोगे, राजा. It is something like that. In medieval times, in courts of kings, there were vassal chiefs. So यहाँ पे ऐसे imagine करो, imagine like this. US का दरबार है, वहाँ पे इंडिया से वैसल चीफ बैठेगा. अगर we go closer to US, so that's how C. Raja Mohan has narrated this thing. So false narrative of vassal state now has been exposed. That is how he looks at it. Can you imagine this? How in different ways scholars can interpret, and that enriches your answer if you write in this manner, right? Rather than just bringing facts and figures that you anyway get from different sources, right? So current NDA approach, in comparison to the previous government UPA approach, right, is marked by confidence, political ownership. So we have done this, we own it. We take the responsibility, right? And strategic clarity. There is no strategic ambiguity in dealing with US. Rather, there is clarity. There are no baggages like will become vassal state, US engagement with US is threatening. Shedding those baggages, shedding those apprehensions, removing those apprehensions, there is now strategic clarity, right? That is how C. Raja Mohan puts it. Third point by Raja Mohan. Trade now is been looked as positive sum game. It's not negative sum game, right? So it's positive sum game. Indian discourse often fixated on what India gives away. हम क्या दे रहे हैं, उसकी anxiety ज़्यादा हुआ करती थी. The anxiety of what we are giving away, rather than what we are getting, focusing on what we are getting, right? So that was the problem initially. Trade negotiations were inherently involving reciprocity. Trade negotiations always involve reciprocity. If you keep looking on what we are giving and not focusing on what we are getting in return, that is not a balanced view, right? Zero-sum thinking kept India out of global rule-making. Very important point. Because we are not going to get as much as we want, we would end up giving more. That has put India outside that rule maker, shaper kind of role. That is what C. Rajamohan highlights, right? So global rules are being made. India is not part of the negotiations. So you lose the opportunity, right? Geo-economic repositioning. Trade deal has led to this as well. World now defined by supply chain reconfiguration. No doubt about that. Ever since that COVID pandemic, right? COVID pandemic and the resultant lockdown, right? The kind of problems that were created because of lockdown, due to dependence on China as far as global supply chains are concerned. Ever since that point, major countries in the world, European countries, US, have been looking forward to diversification in supply chains, right? And after China, they look at India as an important country in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of robust economic growth, industrial capacity, right? All these things can ensure much better, reliable kind of supply chain, right? Second, technology standards. This has been experiencing revolutionary kind of stuff, and we have been talking about that, right? The kind of impact that artificial intelligence has been making is something radical, unsettling kind of thing. So in that, how world is repositioning itself geo-economically. So what is India's place in that? What is US place in that? So these two things, and that's why the deal that the Pax Silica framework, right, is something that comes here in these two topics: technology standards and critical minerals competition. So these have become very important, and this has become very important. So increasingly, these factors are shaping geo-economic repositioning along with this factor, supply chain reconfiguration. So India's US EU deals reflect adaptation to this reality. These deals are in the context of these things. Usko adapt kar raha hai. And as I said, I would talk about India EU deal as well in some other lecture. So what is the analytical takeaway? India is transitioning from rule taker to rule shaper in the global economic order. C. Rajamohan. He clearly says India is transitioning from mere rule taker to what? Rule shaper, right? Now, let us conclude the whole discussion, right? Synthesis of different scholars, what they had to say in conclusion, right? So, the India-US trade deal is economically beneficial, politically symbolic, and strategically transformative. And we had enough discussion on all three aspects in the preceding pages, right? Economically beneficial to India as well. We enjoy trade surplus with US. We cannot wait for US to go for 50% tariffs on us, right? Politically symbolic, I talked about that. It has got repercussions politically at the domestic level, at the regional level, as well as the global level, right? And then strategically transformative. India-US strategic relations are important as a hedge to Chinese hegemony, and that seems to have been revived, number one. Number two, the growing upstick in US-Pakistan relation was a cause of concern for India, right? So all these aspects have been beneficial for India. So it reflects greater parity, strategic diversification, and negotiating confidence. So greater parity, we highlighted that in the initial part. We are now negotiating on much more equal footing as compared to earlier times. Second, India has responded by strategic diversification. India EU deal is an example of it. Third, the negotiating confidence has increased, particularly under this government, according to C. Rajamohan, right? However, challenges still remain, right? Challenges remain in managing great power relations. We discussed that, right? Domestic sectoral interests, particularly agriculture and industrial sector, right? How much market will be opened, how much competition will come from US, right? Those concerns. And global volatility in general. global volatility in general, induced by China, induced by Russia, induced by US, right? All these things would be there as challenge, right? So overall, summing up the entire thing, this is not a reset, but a recalibration, right? It is a recalibration, right? Embedding India firmly into evolving geo-economic architecture of the 21st century. We felt like left out, right? But now we are right back in. So we embedded ourselves in the emerging, evolving geo-economic architecture of 21st century. Having said that, looks quite optimistic, good. However, the caveat is details are still being worked out and we have to wait for the implementation. And that will tell us to what extent India is being embedded in that evolving geo-economic structure and how beneficial it would be to India. Right? Thank you so much.